Welcome, everybody, to this first review episode of Strong Style. I am one of your hosts, the Outlaw John Rocha, joining you here live from LA. Joined, as always, by my co-host down there in Orlando. A little bit of a somber mood as we approach this review. Aaron Turner, how are you, man?
I'm doing well. I've recovered after watching both episodes of this show. My goodness, what a way to start the new season. I am a big fan of this show. I'm a big fan of what these guys do, and man, they came out swinging with season 2.
Yeah, I mean, in season 1, it was a bit, and we're talking about Dark Side of the Ring. If you saw the title for this podcast or this episode, rather, Dark Side of the Ring, the Chris Benoit story, parts 1 and 2. We're going to be reviewing that on this special episode of Strong Style, and we're going to be spoiling it, so there definitely will be spoilers on this review. Just letting you know, if you haven't watched it, go to YouTube and watch it on YouTube, or go to the Vice channel, and even download the Vice app on your Roku and watch these. They've made them free for people to watch, and they really start. You're right about this, Aaron. They're starting out season 2 feeling like they learned the lessons from season 1, and it feels like a more complete documentary rather than just a retelling of what happened here. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, the production value is really off the charts. Like the way that they decided to do it using reenactments, but they're blurred, they're skewed, so you can't really. You're having actors there to portray these moments, but it doesn't feel like they're actors. It feels like you're really there watching the guys, and especially that moment where they did the WrestleMania 20 reenactment of Benoit and Eddie in the ring. It looked just like wearing their gear. I assume that they actually had their gear. So it was just off the charts. It's better than what I was expecting. And I know that these two guys that produced the show took so much care to put together this episode, especially because it was this one and the Owen Hart episode that they just overwhelming. Like when they took a poll for season 2, what do you want for season 2? Right. Benoit, Owen Hart was like neck and neck. Like, you got to do these 2 episodes. And I think they pulled this one off. It's just the Bruiser Brody episode from season 1 is really, I think, like their finest hour. And then this one, oh my gosh, like just I could watch this over and over and over again if I wanted to torture myself.
Well, the thing is, and it's a good point. It's a good thing you bring that up, actually, because I watched both of these episodes twice in preparation for us discussing it, because I was engrossed into both episodes. And I went back last night after my girlfriend went to bed and watched their Randy Savage episode from the first season, because I didn't see any of these Dark Side of the Rings at all last season. Even when people were tweeting at me and Ryan when we were doing the show over there to do it, I just like, wow, I'll get around to it. I don't hear the best reviews for it, so we'll see. But then when I saw the trailer for the Benoit thing and so many people tweeting at me to watch it, I finally just took the time to watch it, and I was just blown away by it overall. And who are the 2 gentlemen again? Can we get their names?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I got their names pulled up right here. It is Evan Husney and Jason Eisner.
Okay.
2 guys that met. Actually, I believe they were saying they met at Sundance. One had a film there, and one was producing a film, and they just kind of bonded over wrestling and decided to make a show together. And I learned all this from Talk Is Jericho. So if you listen to the latest episode of Jericho's podcast, they're both on there talking about how Dark Side of the Ring kind of got started, a little bit of background on this episode. It's a good companion piece to what we're talking about here.
Listen, we'll get into it in just a second, but I'm super surprised that the WWE allows them to use footage that they use.
It surprised me too.
Right? Because I thought the WWE is like very much, and we saw the footage of Vince doing the tribute show, and then later Vince doing that statement where he said, "We're not mentioning Benoit ever again." And you get all these former WWE people. That's not so difficult to do, because once they're out of contract, they can talk to anybody they want. But the footage was really shocking to me that they were able to get their hands on it. It's certainly not public footage, so I was shocked that they were able to get a lot of the videos from his matches. And from the tribute episode, which isn't available anywhere.
Right. I don't know what the fair use is for that. I don't know if it kind of falls into that area, but yeah, I was also surprised because I thought maybe you would see some old pictures or some stuff from Japan that the WWE doesn't own, but no, they showed a lot of matches from his time in WWE and WCW, which the company now owns. Yeah. So yeah, that was a surprise to me as well.
Yeah, let's jump into this thing. First of all, I would say this. I think both of us were fans of Benoit, certainly enjoyed Chris Benoit as a wrestler. One of these guys, these like smaller dudes that just always stuck in your mind. his matches were never boring. You never felt like you phoned it in. You coupled that with Eddie around the same time and Jericho around the same time and Dean Malenko, the Iceman, being around, Saturn even around the same time. These guys were all these kind of like smaller dudes who found their way into main event positions at the WWE after being such a highlight reel in the WCW. And of course, all these guys building up through the different ranks when they were younger. It was fascinating for me to kind of revisit this time in wrestling history, because sometimes you can just get so caught up with the big names, the bigger names, that you forget that there is these wrestlers that every once in a while bubble up from the mid card all the way to the top. And certainly Benoit and Eddie in that moment where they hug when they won at WrestleMania, both winning the respective titles, was an incredible moment. And of course, we get into the tragedy. What was your overall feeling as you watched both of these episodes, Aaron?
Well, I think what started it off was Chris Jericho, who is the narrator for this entire season, not just this episode, which was
really
interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I found that out also in that episode. Cool. The first thing Jericho says when he sits down is like, "Listen, I don't give a shit what you think about what I'm about to say," because he's been scrutinized in the past by many people about his thoughts on Benoit. He's been on Twitter saying, he takes the standpoint of he was a great worker. He doesn't really mention the other stuff, and I think that causes an issue with some people. I think even our mutual friend Ryan Satin had an issue with that. So I think they've had some back and forth in the past. But I think that really set the tone for what we were going to hear. It's like, okay, we're going to hear this version. And Chavo even says it later when he says, we have a chance to do like the right version of this because somebody's going to do it eventually. We got to be the ones to do it, the right way. And I got to say, man, out of everybody in this, they interview so many people from, Chris Benoit's older son to Nancy Benoit's sister and everybody in between. Just the person that killed me the most was Chavo, because Chavo telling that story of how he found Eddie the next day in the hotel room. And I don't know how you make it through that without just, crushing your soul. Cause it's just your uncle's there and and just the last moments of his life. It's awful. And then you just have to go on. You have to, now you have to go to the tour and wrestle the next day. And then you get the call a few months later that one of your other best friends, Chris Benoit, is dead. And then you find out the whole circumstance of everything. And it's just like, what is this? Like, is this a bad, like, Law and Order episode? Like, what is going on right now? And especially in part 2 at the beginning, when they're talking about how they found, the family, how they found Daniel and how they found Nancy and how they found Chris, was just, it sounded like one of the craziest things you ever heard in your life. And what I didn't realize, as much as I even know about the situation, was that, because I thought it was just all one day and done. Like he went on this rampage. He killed everybody in one day and then he killed himself. No, he was there for a couple days, like with his deceased family. And it's just like, what in the hell? Like, what happened to this guy? And I know they talk about CTE and I know they talk about that, and that doesn't excuse anything in my opinion. And it seemed like it was a small part, and they talked about roid rage, and that was a very small part. And they kind of mocked the WWE wellness policy, which Jericho actually defended and said, no, it's actually more stringent than you think, which was a cool thing to hear. But I think where I sit on it is, it's probably the most in-depth I've heard about it, because there's things I didn't even know or didn't even think of. But there are a couple things that they didn't really touch on, which I was kind of surprised about. That Benoit was such a big fan of Tommy Billington, aka the Dynamite Kid. They talk about him for just a second in the documentary. And what's really sad about it is that Dynamite Kid really, he ended up in a wheelchair. They do talk about that, but he was also very abusive towards his family. Another guy that lost everything and lost his entire family. His wife, his kids were alienated from him. It's really sad parallel between those two. Dynamite Kid also no longer with us. But and they also didn't mention, he was also talked about very briefly. Johnny Grunge, who was Benoit's neighbor, was mentioned very briefly. He also died a little bit before these Benoit murders took place, and that also had a big toll on his psyche and what was going on. So just a couple things they probably didn't have the time to go in depth on, but I think they are worth mentioning. But it's just a crusher of a story, because I'm a Benoit fan. I even remember being at the Stewart's Hot Dogs where my sister worked, and like looking on the TV, and it was like Benoit family murdered. And it's like, what the hell's going on? And like you watch the tribute show and you're like, oh my God, I cannot believe somebody murdered his whole family. And then you come and find out a few days later, like, no, he did it. It's just like, what?
Yeah. I think this is one of those shocking moments that if you're a fan of professional wrestling, maybe top 5 shocking moments that you're ever going to remember, right? This idea that this, maybe even top 3, dude, maybe even the number 1 for some of you, like,
For sure.
how, I mean, because it's not just the early passing, right? Like Eddie dying early, 38 years old, by the way. That's so insane. Eddie was 38 when he died. I passed 38 a while ago. So it's crazy to think about the fact that he died at 38, and then Benoit's 40 when this happens, and you think to yourself, my God, it's already tragic that a wrestler dies young, but the fact that he killed his wife, who everyone by all accounts said they were extremely in love with each other, and to kill your young child, I think that's the thing that puts it way over the top, right? We hear about people all the time abusing their significant others, or sadly or tragically killing their significant others, but killing a 7-year-old child, like that's just choking the child out, drugging the child, and then choking him to death, a 7-year-old child. And then from what Vicky said, that he put his knee on Nancy's back and was choking her and broke her back or something like that. I don't know if that's 100% true. Just thinking about those images are horrific. And what you brought up earlier is incredible too, Aaron, the idea that he sat with those bodies in his house for 2 days. What was the mania going on? Was he crying constantly? Was he walking around reciting Bible scriptures? Was he talking to these bodies like they were still alive? Like, how deep was the CTE? And then as you do a little more research on this, which I did outside of the documentary, you find out from a couple of the wrestlers that his former tag team partner, a guy named Biff Wellington in Canada, died on the same day as Benoit.
I didn't know that.
That's insane to take a look at that situation as well. And then I had no idea there's been popular conspiracy theory amongst wrestling fans that it was Kevin Sullivan who did it, and snuck in there because there were text messages that were sent the day after Benoit supposedly died, that the Wikipedia entry was altered 12 hours before anyone knew that Nancy had died. Like, there was so much around this that isn't just a straight up, okay, this is a tragedy. There's some elements of this that lead to some conspiracy theories and people believing certain things, because Nancy, and some of you who are listening may not know, Nancy was Kevin Sullivan's ex-wife, and Kevin Sullivan and her were together for a long time, and they booked this whole angle which the documentary gets into, that Benoit kind of was booked to be this angle that breaks them up, and then actually got together. So this whole thing, the tragedy of this whole thing too is Nancy. Nancy kept getting into these relationships with these guys that physically abused her. Kevin physically abused her. Benoit physically abused her. And so you hear, because that's another thing they don't touch on, is that there were accusations of physical violence from Benoit towards his first wife. They don't get into that. There have been allegations of that as well. So as much as we got in this hour and a half or 2-hour documentary, we still have more to learn about this thing. And I'm going to download the book, or I'm going to find that book of that the guy, the author that they interviewed in the documentary as well, to talk about it. But overall, I think it did the documentary does such a fantastic job of giving you the background of Chris Benoit, the wrestler, of why people loved him so much, of why people liked him so much, and what it was about him, and how he developed. And they also give you the background on Nancy, what she did, what she was able to do as this valet type thing, and also wrestler, kind of laying the groundwork for what would come later on. So predominantly the valet that can also wrestle. She did such a great job of that, So all of that gets proper time, so that you have an understanding of how tragic this really is. And then when they get into the details, they really get into the details. They don't spare it. They don't try to gloss it over. They totally confront it in the second half of the documentary, part 2 of the documentary, and see people's reactions to it. And you hear the police, the sheriff that was there, and what he experienced, what he saw, and once again, what you just mentioned, Aaron, the blur of Benoit hanging, like they actually have a dramatization of a guy looks like Benoit hanging from his thing, as if how you would actually find him dead, So then the Bible, they have the Bibles next to each body. Then there was a suicide note. And then you hear about the connection with Eddie. I think that's one of the really heartbreaking things too, is to see how deep this death really affected him.
Yeah, I mean, the best of friends, and they talk about it over and over and over again. That after Eddie died, that really just crushed Chris, a guy that showed no emotion, that they said, and just endlessly sobbing and crying and just inconsolable. And that's the part of it that I really, that really strikes a chord, because these are two, and yeah, they're two men that loved each other, and you hardly ever, see, like, you see that side of it. The business, everybody in the business is kind of their acquaintances. They say in the business you have many acquaintances but very few friends. And these two were obviously best friends, like brothers almost. They came into WWF together. They left WCW together with Malenko and Saturn. And something they also didn't mention is that, they don't mention this in a lot of documentaries, but Benoit was on top of WCW. Benoit was the world champion when he came over from WCW. So Benoit did get to that pinnacle. And I think he was always a guy that, Jim Ross talks about it a lot in the documentary, that he was a stud from day one. And the thing I like about this documentary as well is that I feel like it's the most even account. They get Nancy's sister in there, and it's not just about Benoit, it's about Nancy as well. And there's like very few things that want to skew and tell Nancy's side of the story. She's been lost in this. They talk about in the documentary, like, she's a victim.
Yeah.
And Daniel's a victim. And it's just these two kind of get pushed aside. And you look at this grand Chris Benoit, the wrestler, the legendary wrestler, and you don't think about the people that, he hurt along the way. And, like we were talking off air, like the last like 10 minutes of this, when, when David Benoit gets to meet Nancy's sister, they get to hook up again. It's just, it is a happy ending to a very sad story so far. And he said he still loves wrestling, and they got to go to, I believe they went to All In, I think, or Double or Nothing, one of the two, an AEW show.
Yeah, but not a WWE show. No.
Yeah, it was not a WWE show, because I've actually heard rumors that that David is not actually allowed to go backstage anymore at WWE. I don't know if that's true or not. That's just a rumor. I don't know. But it's kind of hard to look at him too, because you see he looks so much like his father.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh man, like, I don't know, as a promoter, as a person, I know he wants to get into wrestling. I don't know how you even handle that kind of situation, because you look at him, and that name, that Benoit name, just has such a stigma attached to it. Like, do you give this kid a fair shake, or do you, he's like, I can't walk that road again. And Jericho talks about that, where it's like, this kid did nothing. Like, this kid is a victim, and he's essentially been blackballed from everybody. And, nobody helped this kid when the chips were down for him, and his whole family was gone. And it's just really sad. But hopefully with this documentary, and with, reconnecting with the other side of his family, hopefully he can get some help, or some closure, some stability.
Well, and that's the thing that was also kind of bubbling under the surface of this whole thing, is there's just a tremendous amount of anger and bitterness and resentment from all sides to all sides. I mean, that sequence where JR is trying to defend them doing the tribute show is I guess we shouldn't have done it. I guess we shouldn't have done. We should have got more information. Our bad, I guess. You can tell there's still a little bit of bitterness about how much shit they took for doing that tribute show, and how much crap they took from the media for doing that tribute show. Because he's right. I think a lot of times, and I've certainly pushed back and fought against people like Josh McCouga, who make fun of professional wrestling. I hate when people make fun of professional wrestling. Yes, can you make fun of it? Of course, but there's a way to make fun of it that isn't like denigrating its existence. And I think that's what you feel when that bitterness comes out, or that resentment comes out. It's from a lifetime of having to defend your career in a field where people are more than willing to make fun of it, rather than try to look at it as another form of entertainment. And you see that in Chavo as well. Chavo's like, I guess, screw me for saying something positive and trying to humanize this guy. So that was just a small window into probably years of shit he's gotten for what he said in the tribute video, which is, I trust you with my kids, I do this or that. And so it was just all these things these guys took. And then David himself, David saying, like, I've taken so much shit. People talk about me behind my back. Like, you're like, wow, why would anybody do that to David Benoit, who had nothing to do with this, was nowhere near this, and is the one who lost his dad, his stepmom, and his young brother, who he had been like connecting with and developing a bond, at least according to the documentary, with. So those are to suffer another tragedy, which is the loss of respect or human dignity from other people just because your last name is Benoit. is another element to this tragedy that he is living with, which is so sad for him. So you're right, that happy ending was nice to see after all the sadness we had to trudge through to get there, you know.
Yeah, it was also eye opening that JR was the representative to go to the WWE
Right.
representative to go to the funeral, and he was not welcome.
Nope.
So that was an interesting thing to me. I didn't know that. But if you do get a chance, like if you want more companion pieces, definitely check out that the latest episode of Talk is Jericho. There's also one from about maybe a year ago, maybe 18 months ago, where he actually talks with Nancy's sister
Mm.
for like her first interview, I think, ever, talking about the whole situation. It's really good. And Jericho's done such a good job of keeping the memory of Chris and Nancy alive, not just
Yep.
Chris. I know they were great friends. They wrestled in Japan, all over the world together.
Yeah.
But, I think Chris is one of the few that are actually trying to help. Chris and Chavo and Dean Malenko and these others are actually trying to help mend the family. They know what he did was wrong. They know that it's a terrible Chris. Jericho put it best, I think, when he was talking about if Chris Benoit would have known the impact that this would have put on not only his legacy but the wrestling business, he would have been absolutely devastated. So
Yeah.
it just kind of speaks to what was wrong with this guy, what happened, and what makes a person do these kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's unfortunate. I want to give a shout out to Vicky Guerrero as well, who I thought
Mm.
was absolutely fantastic in the documentary, you know, as someone who experienced both the loss of her husband and then the loss of Chris and her friend Nancy. You know,
Yeah.
Nancy, who had come over and shook her out of bed after a week of depression and sadness, crying over the loss of her husband. You know, there was such a special bond there, and all of that gets explored in this documentary. So I thoroughly enjoyed this thing. I can't wait to watch more of what's coming in season 2, and I'm definitely going back to watch all of season 1, maybe daily, one of those, because they're only 45 minutes. Watch one of those early in the morning and just kind of knock it out and enjoy it. So kudos to the two gentlemen doing this, because I think there's enough to explore here in the world of professional wrestling that I think is good to flesh out and show the entire picture. I've always been a fan of not protecting the shield. I'm always a fan of showing everything so that you understand that there are elements of this in every avenue of life. And so it is just like everything else. And that's I like when they show the flaws and the positives as well, you know. And I don't know if there's ever going to be, you know, and then JR says it. I can't ever imagine putting him in the Hall of Fame. You know, it just doesn't make any sense at all. And it's the sad truth, because if anybody deserved to be in there, if he hadn't done this tragic thing, it would be Chris Benoit, like first ballot. No doubts, you know, all the championships he's won, the way he. But no, I do want to end it asking you about this. What do you think about these theories about CTE or steroids, which of course the WWE is very defensive about when they, which they chronicle in a documentary? Do you think this was a CTE thing? Because from the reports I read, they said his brain looked like the brain of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient, and that his enlarged heart was like a year away from exploding anyway.
I don't know enough about it. I know, like, from what I've read from the guy that was the doctor from the concussion movie.
Yeah.
I forget his name, but he's actually the WWE's concussion doctor now. So when you go to get cleared, you have to go see him. If he doesn't clear, you're no good. So when Daniel Bryan came back after all those concussions, he had to go see this doctor, the same doctor that looked at all these, ex-football players and discovered CTE more or less was a thing. So they're taking it very seriously. And that's the extent of it that I know. That, this gentleman, Ben, so I want to say it's Obamanu, but that's not right. Ben Obamanu was a player at Auburn, but it's something like that. And he's the guy that cleared Daniel Bryan. He's the guy that's cleared Sheamus from his concussions, and he's the guy that's overseeing it now. So there's a lot of protection for WWE superstars now.
Yeah, and thank God. And that's something I think Jericho pointed out, and a shell-shocked Dean Malenko as well, as we watched through the whole thing. Still probably having a very hard time revisiting. But there's one thing Jericho points out, and that's that idea that you see post this tragedy, the wellness program has been more stringent. People are more aware of the CTE kind of stuff, and they want to confront it early and get it over with. But of course, wrestlers are going to do what they're going to do. Just like Aaron Rodgers and some of these football players, like, I'm playing to the end. I'm playing to the end. There are some people who are just built to do it and will take the punishment later. But what you want to avoid is tragedy like this. If this was the actual reason for why he did what he did, we may never know. And that's the sad truth of this whole thing is no matter how much we explore this tragedy, we'll never know what the inciting incident was, because there was a history certainly of fights, but every couple fights, there were some physical altercations. Certainly Vicky tells the story of Benoit smashing the window of a car when he was mad at Nancy. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be leading to a murder and the murder of a child, so
Right.
you just don't, you want to find out one day, maybe if we ever can, and maybe we won't, the inciting incident of what happened here. But it is a very tragic story, and I'm very glad that we got a chance to watch it and we got a chance to review it on our show, because this kind of stuff is what keeps me coming back and enjoying wrestling. And I don't mean that in a aloof way or a flippant way. I mean that these are human stories, and they have to be told so that people see the connection, the universal connection with these wrestlers in these situations in life.
Yeah, I'm kind of hesitant to even jump back into the story because you feel like, I feel like I've heard it a million
Mm,
times. And just the way that this was done and the way that it was presented and things I didn't know.
yeah.
It just kept me coming back. So these guys did an excellent job. It's an excellent show. And I will continue to watch. And I'm glad that people, fans of ours were saying, "Hey, you guys got to watch this. I want to hear you talk about it." So
Yeah.
yeah, that was good. Thank you for doing that, because I don't
Yeah.
know when I would have got to it otherwise.
Fair enough. Well, let us know what you thought about the documentary in the comments section below, or tweet at us. You get at only Aaron Turner at the Rocha says. Tweet. Let us know what you thought about this review as well, and what your thoughts are on this tragedy, and what you'd like to see maybe down the road from Dark Side of the Ring, or from us, maybe reviewing more of these kinds of things in that way. And yes, I heard you about the Lapsed podcast, so I will be listening to that as well. The 10 hours of document of that of this story to hear more of the details. And there's more details out there for you to explore if you want to explore. It's a deep dark hole if you want to go in there, but there are details out there for you to explore. So there you go. All right, that's Aaron Turner. I'm John Rocha. Thanks for watching this review of Dark Side of the Ring. Chris Benoit, and don't forget our main show, Strong Style, is up for you to watch and listen to this week. We are talking from WrestleMania 6, the main event, The Ultimate Warrior versus Hulk Hogan, champion versus champion, the ultimate challenge. And we'll talk to you next time on Strong Style.